everybody, so glad to see you on the channel today. We are going to be doing a slimline Lawn Fawn card, and Lawn Fawn cards for me have more elements, I feel like, than any of the other cards that I do. So I wanted to take you from start to finish on this card. This will be a longer video because I'm doing that, but I feel like getting the sense of making an entire card and how it flows is a great idea. So if you haven't taken the time to subscribe, like, and sign up for notifications, I would greatly appreciate that. Everything that I use today will be listed in the description below, so you don't have to keep up with it. I started with Dusty Concord, Festive Berries, Wild Honey, and Dried Marigold. These are colors that are a little out of the box for me, but I don't consider myself using fallish colors very often, except in the fall. So we're going to try these, and I'm going to show you when I pick my colors. I usually do a test swatch, just make sure that they all are similar in how they blend together and that they look great together. So I've already test swatched and decided on these colors. The next thing that I'm going to do with this card is watercolor. So I cut out a piece of paper that is my slimline size, and I did this in watercolor paper. Next, I just took my Distress ink Oxide and smushed some ink down on this Waffle Flower media mat. This mat is nice because you can smush your ink on it and use it as your palette, really. So I'm going to start with a light wash of this color, and then I'm going to go back and add more color until I get it to the depth that I want. So I like using these big wide watercolor brushes when I'm doing this type of wash. I feel like I get smoother lines, and I kind of like the look of the stripes across it. I do blend those a little bit, but I feel like that just looks really cool. What I'm trying to accomplish with this is a darker color at the top faded down into lighter color. So you'll see me continue to add pigment at the top and kind of fade it down into my paper. I don't use a whole lot of water here, so my brush is wet to start, and I did spray that first smush of ink with just a little spritz of water, but I try not to add too much water because one, it washes things out, but two, my paper will get very wet and not lay flat as easily. I usually don't worry too much about the laying flat because if I was worried about it, I would tape this thing down, but I like to use the exact size paper that I'm going to use so that I've gotten all the way to the edges versus using some painter's tape and taping it down. The way that I flatten out the paper is a trick from Jennifer McGuire, I believe, who says put it through a laminator. So once it's dry, I put the paper through a heated laminator a couple times, and that straightens my paper back out. So if you're wondering what you do with warped watercolor paper, using a laminator is really great. So I'm going to start with the Festive Berries as my middle section, and this is one of those colors that it looks a lot darker in its Distress Oxide form versus its watercolor form. So if you're test swatching your inks, then you want to make sure you've added water to them so you can get an idea of what color they are with that water in them. And of course you can add darkness just like I did with the purple by adding more ink to your brush and getting this a little bit better. I always dry up. I got this paper a little wet, so you can see I'm kind of checking that out, making sure, but now it's time to start adding some more color. So I'm going to add just a little bit darker of that Festive Berries and fade it down into the lighter color. Now we'll move to our next color. Same process, that is the Wild Honey. So we're going to use that to kind of go down our area here, keeping it darker at the top and fading it below. I'm not going all the way to the end of this because I know that I'm going to have some grass coming up on my card, so I don't have to paint the entire panel, just close to the bottom as I think the grass is going to be. So I do that, and then we'll move forward to starting with our stencils. So I've given this panel time to dry, and now we're going to start stenciling. This is a leaf stencil that it has a second part to it so that it layers. So I'm just lining this up, and then I'm going to tape it down. And because it's not a slimline stencil, we'll have to move it down the card a little bit later. That's one of the many reasons you want to make sure that your card is dry, because you're going to have to add some washi tape or something to hold it down there. So my plan for the stencil is to make each of these leaves a little two-toned, and I'm going to go with the same color of the panel and then the next color of the panel. So on the top where I've got purple or dusty concord, I'm going to add some dusty concord to parts, and then I'm also going to add some festive berries to this part. I just thought that kind of gave it a cohesive look, and it looks kind of cool to have multicolored little leaves. So I'm adding some festive berries to my purple leaves, and then we'll go down and we'll kind of do the same thing in each section where we're kind of combining the colors so it blends together very well. So we're down in the next section where we're going to start with festive berries, and then I'm going to add some of my yellow colors. So we'll go from there. I did decide that wild honey is a very yellow color, and I wanted to mute that a little bit. So when I'm adding my colors on top here, I'm going to use dried marigold. It's just a muted orangey yellow, and I thought it looked really good on top of wild honey. I'm going to add this over some of the red at the bottom, and I'm trying to kind of keep it split into halves so that I keep the red in the middle just the same, and then I'm adding a little bit of that dried marigold to the bottom. And then we're going to take this stencil off, show you what it looks like, and I'm still going to do my layering stencil. So we've still got another stencil of leaves that I'm going to follow with the same pattern. So here's that reveal, and you'll see how much is left. I've still got some area down there that I need to color in. So I will use the same stencil and go down. Notice that I've got actual ink on this from the first part. I should have cleaned that off. It's not the end of the world, but it doesn't make your colors quite as crisp here because it's going to add a little bit of that purple and red. So you'll notice that I realized that after I've already made one leaf, which doesn't look a whole lot like a problem, but I am going to fix it and then line things back up. Now I've got it cleaned off, so I'm just going to line this bottom part up again and go over it with some more dried marigold. I'm going to put a little bit of festive berries down into the yellow, just a small amount, because like I said, this whole part of the yellow may not be seen much because of the grass that will be going there. So we'll add a little bit of festive berries up at the top, and then I'm going to show you the reveal. Here's what that first layer looks like. I really love those two-toned leaves. So now I'm going to move to my stencil that's the second part of the layering set, and I'm just going to mess with it a little bit to see where I feel like it should go. There probably is a more scientific way to do this, but I tend, usually when you're looking through your stencil, you can kind of see where the open areas are, and so I just mess with it until I feel like I've got a pattern I like. I sped up this section since we've already gone through the stencil once, and you'll see I'm doing my dusty concord, and then I'm going to go back and add festive berries on some parts of these leaves. I took the dusty concord a little bit further down into the red this time, and I'm going to do the same thing with adding my dried marigold, and then I'm going to move my stencil down. So I've got lots of images that I'm going to use on this. I love how that panel turned out. But now we need to color our images. So when I look at coloring my images, especially with a colorful background like this, I try to pick colors that match the background. So with this, you can see all these colors I used, and I will make sure and list those in the description for you. I've cut out a lot of images. I tend to cut my images out first because I have a new brother scan and cut, and so I like to cut the images out and then use them in the colors that match my background the best. So I start with these images pre-cut and then I color. I really like these mice in the warm gray color. I only have W1 and W5, and I think a really dark like W8. So I don't have a lot in between that 1 and 5, but it works fine. You do need to do a little bit more blending, but it does work well together, as you can see on my little mice up there. So I wanted to share how I come up with my copic colors to use. I want to make some purple flowers, some pink flowers, and some yellowy orange flowers. So what I do is grab a piece of the same paper that I'm cut my images out on, and I start making swatches. I know the colors, the caps are close, but there is something to be said for seeing how they blend together and looking at them on a piece of paper next to what you're going to use them on. So I ended up deciding on V12 and RV63. I know I wrote 13, but it's 63. And I blended those two right next to it on this sheet of paper and just really liked how those looked together. So when I'm using pretty light colors, I tend to start with my darkest color. And with this pile of leaves, there's 3 different shapes of leaves. So I'm going to try to keep it consistent where the purple leaves are shaped like what I'm coloring right now. And I also think that you need to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to shade it like there's a shadow coming from the sun somewhere specifically? Are you going to shade it where it's dark on the outside and light on the inside? Just make a decision and decide how you're going to do it, and you need to keep it consistent on the card. I felt like with these leaves it was easier to make the dark sides on the edges and then fade it into a lighter color in the middle. I think that makes a really cool light effect on your images. So I go in with the dark color, and then I usually go in a couple times. Now I'm going to come in with adding more dark to the edges. And I just play with it. I know that there is probably someone who has a very specific thing, but I just tend to kind of go line my thing once or twice, and then I'm going to start coming in with my light color and see how it looks. One thing about Copics is that you want to make sure you've given it enough time to dry once you've started blending to make sure that it looks right, because a lot of times it looks not great and then it dries and it looks perfect. So don't give up on an image, and don't decide that you're done until you've let it dry. I'm going to speed up the last part of this, but you'll see I'm coming in with the RV63 in the middle of the leaves and just kind of dabbing it on the side, making sure I'm not leaving streaks. And it looks really cool. So I usually go back after I've added my little bit in the middle and add some more dark to the edges. And you can kind of see as I'm filling that in what a cool effect that gives it. So I guess I've probably done 4 or 5 layers of the darker and just 1 to 2 of the lighter in the middle. I try to keep it to just 1 if at all possible with that RV63, so you keep that light effect. So here's what it looks like, and then I will speed up the film for the rest of the colors. Next, it's time to do the pink leaves. I'm going to speed this up because it's the same process as before, and play you a little bit of music because I love just listening to music and watching people color. So in case you are the same way, I'm going to do that. I'm also following the leaves that are all the same shape again. Remember, trying to keep it consistent. So I've added the light color and you see how you can see that outline. So I'm going to go back and add more colors until that looks smoother. And I go in and add more of the light color, I go in and add a little bit more of the dark color around the edges, but that will get it smoothed out. So now that we've done this coloring for the leaves, I'm going to start doing my next leaves, but I'm going to leave that off camera just because we've already established how we're coloring leaves. Now we need to start setting up our scene. I have these two grassy hills that I've cut out with a die and ink blended with mowed lawn, and then you'll see I've put some splatters of water and some splatters of a darker concentration of that mowed lawn, and I'm going to put these on the bottom of my card. So I usually just make several of these in different shapes with my dies so that I've got some options on how my hills can look. I'm going to glue these down, and then once I've got them getting glued, I'm going to flip this over and just trim the edges off. You may want to hang on to those edges depending on how many of these cards you're going to make, or just if you use grassy hills, a lot of times it comes in handy to have a little extra of that to stick behind and really layer up your set. So trimming these off with just regular scissors. You could take this and go through something like your Tim Holtz trimmer. I'm just going to use scissors to cut up my edges and get that all squared, and then we're going to set up our scene on the front of the card. So when I'm setting up a scene, I want to do it in layers. This sentiment is going to be heat set with embossing powder, so I don't want to have that embossing powder on my little images and get stuck behind them and heated to them. So I try to figure out where I'm going to put all of my images, and then I go ahead and get ready to do the sentiment. So I'm doing this flying by to say, and then I have a little wavy happy birthday that I'm going to use. Once I've decided where those images are going to be, I'm going to carefully move my card over to the Misty, get it taped down, keeping everything as still as possible where I'm going to heat set. I'm trying out a new tool today. It's the Rabbit Hole Designs anti-static powder tool. This tool is really cool and I'm using it for the first time, so I'm going to give you a little review. I'm going to use my Versamark ink to stamp the sentiment, and then we're going to use some Wow embossing powder. I'm going to stamp the sentiment 3 times because it's watercolor paper, and I always am a little worried that my sticky ink will absorb down into that watercolor paper, so I usually do it 3 times just to be safe. So this will put the tool to the test here. We're putting on our white embossing powder on this beautiful background, and I am hoping the tool works and that it does not let any of this white stick to the background. Looks like it all taps off so easily. That's great. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to check it with the heat and we'll see if it got every little piece off. So we're going to heat set it. I do not see any stray pieces of that anywhere, and I heated it from the back and the front. So I'm really impressed with that tool. Definitely recommend. We are almost done with this card. I cut out this slimline die from Lawn Fawn out of a yellow color cardstock, but I felt like it was too yellow. So I'm going to take some of the dried marigold and kind of come in at the edges and just soften this up so it's not just a straight bright yellow. I'll put down at the bottom what color cardstock this is from Lawn Fawn. How that cardstock looks with the dried marigold, and then I'm going to mount our other piece on it, which I think it just highlights it so well. So we'll add our little characters and I'll show you what the finished project looks like. So here's how it turned out. I did do some white highlighting on my little images, and I put all of them on here, glued them down, and I just think this looks so cute. I hope that whoever gets this really loves it. Here's a couple of up close photos so you can see. I'm so glad you joined me today. Thanks so much. Make sure you hit that subscribe and like button and look in the description for all the details on the products. Thanks guys. Bye.